All right. So today, or what we're going to start talking about here, probably for the rest of this semester, the next few chapters are all kind of concerned with the same-ish topic. What we're going to do today is we're going to define something called a polynomial. Now let's say it this way. We'll say it's the sum or difference of monomials And you're probably like, well, Mr. Kulik, that's not super descriptive because I don't know what a monomial is. So let's now define that then, right? Because it's not a very good definition if we use something else that we don't know what the heck that thing is in our definition. So a monomial is just going to be a real number multiplied to a variable, and that variable raised to some positive whole number exponent. So for example, 5x squared is a monomial. Everybody okay with that? Ooh, boy, we shouldn't have said positive here. I really should say non-negative. Okay. So 5x squared, definitely a monomial, right? 5 is a real number. X is a variable. 2 is a non-negative exponent, or non-negative whole numbered exponent, right? Everybody's okay with that? What about x to the 5th? Is that a monomial?
Yeah.
Yes. What's the real number being multiplied, though? 1, right? Remember, there's always a coefficient of 1 in front of these variables that we know is there, but we don't always write down. Everybody okay with that? Okay. What about 2x? Is that a monomial? It is. 2 is the real number, right? X is the variable. What's the exponent on x? It's 1. We know there's an exponent of 1 there. We don't usually write it down, but there is an exponent there. So that definitely meets the criteria. What about, say, 7? Is that a monomial? It is. So this is a piece of information that maybe we don't know, is that anything to the 0 power is equal to 1. Actually, we shouldn't say anything. Any non-zero number to the 0 power is 1. So really 7 is the same thing as 7 times x to the 0, because 7 is still the same as 7 times 1. So even just a regular number is technically a monomial, even though there's no variable part there to speak of. We know that there's really like an x to the 0 there if we want to include it. Typically we wouldn't, right? But I want to talk about, make sure we understand when we're looking at something if something's a polynomial or not, or monomial or not. What about x to the third over 2? Is this a monomial? Yes. And you're like, Mr. Kulik, there's clearly division going on here and not multiplication. And I would say, student, we know that multiplication of the reciprocal is the same thing as division. So dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2, right? So 1/2 is my like that. So 1/2 is my real number, and then x to the third we know is that part is good. Is everybody okay with that? So all of these are monomials. So you're like, okay, all right, Mr. Kulik, what are some things that are not monomials? Well, how about 1 over x? That's not a monomial. Why is it not a monomial? Because here we're dividing by the variable as opposed to the real number. So dividing by the real number, we can just think of, oh, that's multiplying by the reciprocal of the real number, no big deal. But for dividing by the variable, we can't do the same trick, right? So that's not a monomial. What about something like this? This is also not a monomial. What's the problem here? What negative? The negative in the exponent. Very good, Isabella. Yep. So again, we said the monomial has to have a non-negative whole number exponent. What about x to the 1/2? Again, not a monomial. What's wrong with it? The exponent is not a whole number. A half is not a whole number. Square root of x, again, not a monomial. Piece that you probably don't know yet, we'll talk about more this year, is the square root of x is the same thing as x to the 1/2 power. There's no reason you would know that right now. We'll talk about that more this year, but that's a good reason as to why the square root of x is not making it a monomial. Worth pointing out, though, if I had the square root of 2 times x, that's a monomial. The square root of 2 is a real number, which is no problem. As long as the square root isn't over the x, that's fine. As opposed to, say, the square root of 2x, which is not a monomial, since the square root is also over the x. Do we feel okay about what we mean by a monomial and not a monomial? I think I covered all the weird degenerate cases of things that could get confusing. So then if we talk about things that are polynomials, you can have things like this, right? Where we have the sum or difference of some monomials. Everybody okay with that? Is a single monomial a polynomial? Like, is 3x squared a polynomial? We said it was the sum or difference of monomials. So what are we adding or subtracting from 3x squared to make it a polynomial? 0. Because remember, a single real number we said was a monomial, so we can always think of a monomial plus 0. So that can be a monomial, or a polynomial. And I think we're about out of time, so we'll just stop here. Obviously, I have nothing for you guys to work on this weekend, which is fantastic. Enjoy a break from your math work.